The first time Grace Miller held Ethan, he was barely a year old, small, silent, and severely underweight. She had been volunteering at a children's shelter in Cincinnati, Ohio, when she noticed him in the corner crib, staring at the ceiling with eyes that looked far too tired for someone so young. The nurse whispered that he'd been found abandoned near a railroad track, bundled in a blanket that barely kept out the late autumn chill. The doctors discovered a congenital heart condition. No one expected him to live long. But something in Grace shifted that day. She wasn't a woman with a traditional path. At 29, she'd just finalized her divorce, having walked away from a man who valued status over substance. She'd lost her own mother young and grew up in the foster system, bounced from home to home. Maybe that's why she saw herself in Ethan's stillness. Maybe that's why she walked out of that shelter not alone, but with adoption papers in her hand and a trembling boy in her arms. Raising Ethan was never easy. The first few years were a revolving door of hospital visits, surgeries, medication schedules, and medical debt. Grace worked as a caregiver by day and cleaned offices by night. She gave up dating, socializing, and even pursuing her dream of becoming a writer. Every cent she earned went toward Ethan's treatments, and every hour she had was split between her 2 or 3 jobs. But she never complained. Ethan was her world. As he grew stronger, so did their bond. Grace was the loudest cheerleader at every school recital, the last person standing at every parent-teacher conference. Ethan flourished, bright, kind, and driven. He was the kind of son people praised. He used to hug her tightly and whisper, "One day, I'll make your life easy, Mom." I promise she never asked for that promise to be fulfilled. Watching him get into a top university on scholarship, seeing him walk across that graduation stage, was more than enough. She clapped so hard her hands stung. She cried for hours that night, not out of sadness, but because it felt like all the pain, the sacrifice, had finally meant something. When Ethan met Haley Jennings during his final year of college, Grace was happy for him. Haley was beautiful, confident, and came from an affluent Boston family. Her parents were Ivy League alumni, her mother a law professor, her father a state commissioner. From the beginning, Grace felt like an outsider, but she told herself not to worry. Ethan would never forget where he came from. When the couple married in a lavish Cape Cod ceremony Grace could barely afford to attend, she wore her best dress and the same shoes she'd bought for his graduation. She smiled through it all. She stood alone in the last row, watching the son she raised step into a life she knew nothing about. Haley's parents barely acknowledged her presence. She told herself it didn't matter. After the wedding, Ethan and Haley bought a home in the suburbs of Boston. Grace helped with the down payment. Not that anyone outside Ethan ever mentioned it again. Still, she was proud. She stayed in Cincinnati, but visited when invited, which became less frequent each year. She chalked it up to their busy lives. But deep down, Grace began to notice changes. Ethan no longer called just to check in. Conversations became shorter, colder. He stopped telling her about his work. Haley rarely spoke to her, and when she did, it felt obligatory. Still, Grace believed in patience. She'd been through worse. Surely this was just a phase, a young man trying to balance marriage, career, and adulthood. She reminded herself of the boy who once called her his hero. What she didn't know was that love, no matter how deep, could be slowly unstitched. Not all at once, but thread by painful thread. Grace tried not to read too much into it at first. Ethan had always been thoughtful, the kind of son who'd text her after a long day or call just to ask if she'd eaten. But after the wedding, those calls became less frequent. At first, it was every Sunday. Then, every other week. Soon, the silence stretched into months. When she finally reached him, the conversations were polite, but distant. Something in his tone had shifted. The warmth had cooled, like he was always holding back, always in a rush. She convinced herself it was the stress of a demanding job and a new marriage. She'd raised him better than to forget his roots. It wasn't until a year later, when she visited them in Boston for Thanksgiving, that the weight of the change truly hit her. Haley answered the door with a thin smile, her perfectly manicured nails wrapped around a glass of wine. "Oh, hi, Grace," she said, as though surprised she'd actually shown up. "We didn't think you'd make the drive all the way from Ohio." "I wouldn't miss it," Grace replied, forcing a smile as she stepped inside, balancing a casserole dish wrapped in foil. The house smelled of rosemary, butter, and something else. Something cold. Sterile. It didn't feel like family. Ethan greeted her with a quick hug, but he looked distracted. "Glad you're here, Mom," he said, already turning back toward the kitchen. The table was filled with Haley's family, her parents, her sister and brother-in-law. Even a cousin Grace had never met. Not a single one of them made eye contact when Grace tried to introduce herself. Her seat, she noticed, was at the very end of the table, far from the couple. She wasn't part of the conversation. She was background. It was Haley's mother, Mary Ann, who delivered the first subtle blow. "So, Grace," she said, swirling her wine, "Ethan tells us you worked in home care? That's admirable. I've always believed society needs more people willing to do the less glamorous jobs." There was a pause. Grace smiled politely. "Yes, I've spent most of my life caring for others. I used to clean homes too, and I worked at a memory care facility for a few years." Marianne hummed. "Must have been exhausting work." "It was," Grace replied, her voice steady. "But it taught me patience, compassion. I wouldn't trade those years for anything." Marianne gave a tight-lipped smile, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. That's a noble sentiment. Grace didn't miss the condescension. And neither, she suspected, did Haley. After dinner, when everyone gathered in the living room, Grace offered to help clean up. Haley waved her off. "No, it's fine. We've got it." As she stood alone in the kitchen, rinsing her hands at the sink, she overheard a sliver of conversation from the hallway. "She just doesn't really fit in here," Haley whispered. "She's your mother-in-law," Ethan replied, the tension in his voice unmistakable. "She's your past, Ethan," Haley said coolly, "and we're building a future." The words rang in Grace's ears long after the dishes were put away. That night, in the guest room, she lay awake staring at the ceiling fan spinning above her, the casserole dish untouched in the fridge. Over the next few months, the distance grew wider. Ethan stopped returning calls altogether. When she asked if everything was okay, he texted back short responses. "Busy. Just a lot going on. Talk soon." He never did. Then, one night, Grace received a voicemail from Haley. "Hi, Grace. Just wanted to let you know Ethan's phone's been acting up. If you need anything, probably best to message me directly. We're planning some changes around the house, so it's just been really hectic. Hope you're doing well." It didn't feel like a courtesy. It felt like a barrier. Grace told herself not to interfere. But the silence hurt more than she admitted. For nearly 30 years, her life had revolved around Ethan, his meals, his medicine, his future. She had built him from the ground up, stitch by stitch, sacrifice by sacrifice. Now she felt like a stranger knocking at the door of the very life she'd helped build. When her neighbor passed away unexpectedly and the care home Grace worked at was sold to a private company, she took it as a sign to slow down. She was approaching 60. Her knees ached in the winter. Her hands, once nimble, had begun to stiffen in the mornings. Maybe, she thought, it was finally time to retire, or at least take a break. So she made the call. A short conversation with Ethan, clipped and formal. "I think I'm going to leave my job," she said. Silence on the other end. Then, "Are you sure that's wise?" "I just thought, maybe I could come help around the house for a bit. Haley mentioned you two were thinking about starting a family." There was a pause. Then Ethan sighed. "Let me talk to Haley." 3 days passed without a response. Then finally, a message. "Hey, Mom. We think it's best if you stay in Ohio for now. Things are just really busy here. Haley's parents are helping us a lot. I'm sure you understand. Grace stared at the screen for a long time. That night, she didn't sleep. For the first time in decades, she realized something terrifying. Her son, the boy she had chosen, fought for, and built her world around, was slowly slipping away, and she was powerless to stop it. The call came on a Monday morning, an abrupt end to a career Grace never imagined leaving so suddenly. After nearly a decade of working as a senior care specialist at a private nursing facility in Cincinnati, she was let go. Not because of anything she did, but because the new corporate owners wanted to streamline staff. Just like that, her position, along with her years of loyalty, was gone. She sat in the break room staring at the locker she'd opened thousands of times, her fingers trembling as she folded her scrubs one last time. As she walked out of the building, the Ohio wind bit at her skin, but her mind was elsewhere, on Ethan. Maybe this is the right time to finally spend more time with him, to feel like a mother again, she thought. She spent the week packing, sorting through old photo albums and winter coats. Her apartment lease was month to month. There was nothing holding her back. When she called Ethan to tell him she was planning to stay with them for a while, just until she figured things out, his voice lacked any excitement. "You sure this is the right time, Mom? Haley's been stressed. She's going through fertility treatments. It's delicate." "I'm not coming to disrupt anything," Grace said softly. I'd like to be close, to help if I can." There was a long pause. Then, "Okay, but keep it short, all right?" She arrived in Boston with 2 suitcases and a small box of old books she knew Ethan used to love. The moment she stepped into the foyer of their sleek modern home, she could feel it. She didn't belong. Haley barely looked up from her tablet as Grace entered. "Oh, you're early," she muttered. "I caught the overnight bus. Didn't want to get in the way of your day?" Haley hummed and walked off without another word. That first night, Grace sat alone in the guest bedroom, staring at the white walls. There were no family pictures, no warmth, just silence. The next morning, she made breakfast: eggs, bacon, toast, the kind Ethan always loved. He walked in, took one look at the table, and hesitated. "Haley usually has smoothies," he said. "I know," Grace replied, "but I figured you might enjoy a little throwback." He nodded, sat, and took a few bites, but his eyes never met hers. Later that week, Grace offered to help with household chores: laundry, tidying up, meal prep. But each offer was brushed off. "We already have a cleaning service," Haley said, "and you don't really know how to cook vegan." Still, Grace tried. She spent hours folding linens, reorganizing their pantry, sewing up a tear in one of Ethan's jackets she found in the laundry room. It was her way of saying, "I'm still useful. I still matter." But the worst came one afternoon when Haley's mother, Marianne, stopped by unannounced. Grace was in the kitchen, wiping down the counters, when Marianne walked in, took one look at her, and said loudly, "Still playing housekeeper, I see." Before Grace could reply, Haley appeared and pulled her mother aside. They whispered, "Not low enough." "She doesn't have anywhere else to go," Haley murmured. "Well, she certainly doesn't belong here," Marianne hissed. "What does Ethan think he's doing, running a halfway house for aging maids?" Grace stood frozen, the sponge still in her hand. Her chest tightened, her ears burned. She waited until the front door closed behind Marianne, then went upstairs. She didn't cry. Not right away. She just sat on the edge of the guest bed, trying to catch her breath. That evening, at dinner, she finally found her voice. "I overheard what Marianne said today," she said, her tone even but quiet. "I think it's best I find somewhere else to stay." Ethan glanced at Haley, then back at Grace. "Maybe that's for the best. This house, it's a lot right now, with everything going on." She blinked. "Ethan, I lost my job. I came here because I thought—" Her voice cracked, but she steadied herself. I thought family meant something. He sighed, rubbing his temples. Mom, you always taught me to be independent. That's what I'm trying to do. You being here, it complicates things. And what am I supposed to do? She asked, now barely able to keep her voice from shaking. Live out of a motel? Sleep in a shelter? Haley leaned back, crossing her arms. There's a senior living center near Cambridge. It's got decent reviews. Maybe look into that? Grace turned to Ethan, hoping, begging, for him to speak up, to say something, anything. He didn't. That night, they left a pamphlet on her nightstand. A pamphlet. The next morning, Grace packed her bags. She left without saying goodbye. She walked 2 miles with her suitcase in tow to a small cafe, sat at a corner table, and stared out the window as rain began to fall. Her reflection in the glass looked older, more tired than she remembered. And in that moment, something inside her shifted. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was something colder. He let them treat me like I was disposable. And he said nothing. It was the moment she realized love was not enough. Not when it went unreturned. The rain poured steadily as Grace sat alone in the corner booth of that small Boston cafe, a paper cup of lukewarm coffee untouched in front of her. Her suitcase rested at her feet, scuffed, damp, and strangely symbolic. It held everything she owned now, or at least everything she was willing to carry. She stared out at the sidewalk, where people hurried past under umbrellas, never noticing the woman inside, motionless, watching. For the first time in her life, Grace felt invisible. Not long ago, she had been a mother who mattered, a woman whose days revolved around keeping someone else's world spinning. Now she was simply a burden with no place to go. She thought about going back to Ohio. But to what? An empty apartment she couldn't afford, and memories she wasn't ready to relive? Then her phone buzzed. The name that lit up the screen made her breath hitch. Catherine Delacroix, her former employer. Catherine had been many things: graceful, elegant, generous. A woman of old money and quiet wisdom who treated Grace not like help, but like a confidant. In the 6 years Grace worked as her personal assistant, they'd built a bond stronger than she'd expected. Catherine was the only person who ever asked Grace, "What do you need?" and actually meant it. The message read, "If you're still in Boston, please visit the office. There's something I need you to sign. Monsieur Delacroix, Estate Affairs." Grace blinked. Catherine had passed away nearly a year ago, after a long battle with cancer. This must be something related to her estate. She arrived at the law firm 2 hours later, dripping from the rain, but resolute. The receptionist greeted her with an unexpected warmth. "You must be Ms. Miller. Mr. Sorensen is expecting you." She was ushered into a quiet office where a silver-haired man in a navy suit stood and extended his hand. "I'm Jonathan Sorensen, Catherine's personal attorney. Please have a seat." He pushed forward a folder. Grace opened it slowly and froze. There, in clean black ink, were the words, "Beneficiary, Grace Miller. Assets bequeathed, $8.2 million. She blinked. Once. Twice. I don't understand." Mr. Sorensen smiled kindly. "Catherine left this to you nearly 9 months ago. She considered you family, Ms. Miller, not just an employee. She entrusted this to you knowing you'd never exploit it, and she asked that it be given only when you were ready to start over." Grace's hands trembled. "But why?" He looked her in the eye. "Because she believed you deserved the chance to live, not just survive." That night, Grace checked into a boutique hotel overlooking the Charles River. She didn't tell anyone. No calls to Ethan, no notes to Haley, no updates on Facebook, just silence. She let the world keep spinning without her, while she breathed, slowly, deeply, for the first time in decades. The next morning, she ordered room service, real coffee and Belgian waffles with strawberries, and sat on the balcony in a white bathrobe, watching the river glisten under morning light. For the first time in her life, she wasn't worried about someone else's schedule. That week, she visited every luxury real estate office in the city, not with the intention to prove anything, but to finally find a space she could call her own. Not a borrowed guest room, not a cramped apartment, not a house with someone else's name on the deed. A space that was hers. That's when she found it. A three-bedroom brownstone tucked away on a quiet street in Beacon Hill. Exposed brick, original crown molding, a small garden out back. Nothing flashy, just peaceful. She signed the purchase agreement on the spot. The real estate agent, a young woman named Avery, looked stunned. "Ms. Miller, most clients take weeks to decide. You're sure?" Grace smiled softly. "I've waited long enough." She spent the next few weeks rebuilding, not just her home, but herself. She visited antique stores, picked out furniture, bought fresh flowers every Friday. She painted. She listened to classical music in the mornings. She walked along the river in the evenings with no destination, just her own footsteps echoing beside her. The peace wasn't instant. Some nights she still cried. Memories don't vanish on command. But slowly, she began to reclaim parts of herself that had long been buried under duty and guilt. And then, one afternoon, while unpacking a box labeled Ethan's Things, she found a faded photograph. A 5-year-old Ethan sitting on her lap, laughing as she held a homemade birthday cake in one hand and covered his eyes with the other. She stared at it for a long time. There had been love once. Real love. But somewhere along the way, that love had become conditional, traded for respectability, sold for comfort, eroded by silence. She put the photo in a drawer, not to throw away, not yet, but she no longer needed it on the mantel. The past hadn't disappeared, it never would, but Grace had finally stepped out from under it. And in doing so, she'd found something far more valuable than millions: freedom. 3 months had passed since Grace Miller began her new life on Beacon Hill. Each morning, she brewed a single cup of dark roast, sat by the bay window, and let the light warm her face. The rhythm of her days was simple: yoga in the park, books from the neighborhood shop, occasional dinner with Avery, the realtor who had quickly become a kind companion. Grace never spoke about her past. No one asked. That, in itself, was a gift. Then, one afternoon, while arranging fresh lilies in a vase, her phone rang. She didn't recognize the number, but something told her to answer. "Mom!" It was Ethan. Her grip on the phone tightened. I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from," he said, his voice thin and hoarse. "But I need to see you." Grace said nothing. "Please, I just need 5 minutes." She took a long breath. "Where are you?" "I'm outside." Her heart sank. She walked to the front window and parted the curtain. There he was, standing in the rain, soaked to the bone, holding nothing but a paper bag. His hair was longer now. His once pristine clothes were wrinkled, faded. His face looked worn, like someone who hadn't slept properly in weeks. Against her better judgment, she opened the door. He stepped in slowly, dripping water onto the floor. "I'm sorry," he whispered. She didn't answer. Instead, she walked to the kitchen, returned with a towel, and handed it to him. He took it, drying his face with shaky hands. "I don't want money," he said quickly, eyes darting to hers. "I swear that's not why I came." "Then why are you here?" Ethan hesitated. "Haley left. She filed for divorce." Grace didn't flinch. "I see." She said she couldn't be with someone who had no backbone. Said I was pathetic. Her parents cut me off. I lost my job last month. We're underwater on the house. I've been staying with a friend, but it's not permanent. Silence. "I'm not here to make excuses," he continued. His voice cracked. "I realized what I did to you, what I let happen. I should have stood up. I should have told Haley to stop, told her mother to shut her mouth. But I didn't. I let it happen. I let them treat you like trash." Grace looked at him for a long time, her gaze unreadable. "I can't undo that. But I need you to know I regret it. Every single day." Something in his voice felt genuine, but pain, real pain, had a way of sounding convincing, even when it wasn't. She turned away and walked toward a cabinet, pulling out a folder. I wasn't going to show you this, she said softly, but maybe it's time. She placed the folder in front of him. Inside were emails, transcripts, a printed message from Haley sent to her mother, forwarded by an anonymous sender months ago. Convince him to push her out, make it sound like his idea, tell him she's a stressor to our IVF progress. He'll cave. He always does. Ethan's eyes widened. What is this? You didn't just stay silent, Ethan, Grace said, her voice shaking now. You let them weaponize you. You were their mouthpiece. You threw me out to protect your reputation, your marriage. Not once did you ask how I was doing. Not once did you ask where I went. He looked like he'd been slapped. I know, he whispered. I was a coward. No, she said. Cowards feel fear. You felt nothing. The words hung in the air like smoke. Then she stepped closer, her voice trembling, not with weakness, but restraint. I sold my soul to raise you. I gave up everything, marriage, youth, health, so you could have a life. But that wasn't enough. You wanted me silent, invisible, disposable. I didn't know, he choked out. I didn't know they were manipulating me like that. Did you need an email to know what love looks like? She asked, voice rising. Did you need proof to see the woman who tucked you in every night, who sold her wedding ring to pay for your surgery? His knees buckled slightly as he sat down at the edge of the couch. I don't know how to fix this. You can't, she said. You don't get to rewrite history. He looked up at her, wet lashes clinging to his cheeks. Then tell me what to do. Grace paused. Her heart beat against her chest like a drum. Somewhere deep inside, the part of her that once believed in second chances stirred. But she silenced it. Leave, she said. Just like that? I already did my part, she whispered. I loved you past my breaking point. I fought for you when no one else would. I sacrificed everything. You don't get to come back just because you're broken. I'm not a refuge for your guilt. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Only breath. And then tears. He stood slowly, his shoulders slumped forward. As he walked to the door, he turned one last time. I'm sorry, Mom. I mean it. She didn't answer. Not out of cruelty, but because this time, silence was the only truth left between them. The door closed behind Ethan with a soft click. Grace stood in the silence, her breath shallow, her heart pounding. The echoes of his words still lingered in the room. I'm sorry, Mom. I mean it. But they carried no weight now. Not because she hated him, but because hate required energy, and she had nothing left to give. She walked to the window and watched as he disappeared down the street. No umbrella, no jacket, just a grown man swallowed by the rain. Too late, too lost. She didn't cry. Not this time. Instead, she brewed herself a cup of tea, settled into her armchair by the window, and let the steam rise toward her face. Outside, the city moved on, unaware of the quiet miracle that had just taken place in that brownstone. A woman who had spent decades bending, finally choosing to stand. The next morning, she called her lawyer and updated her will. Ethan's name was removed. Not out of vengeance, but clarity. Later that week, she donated a portion of the inheritance to a nonprofit that supported young women aging out of foster care, a cause close to her heart. She funded art programs, mentorship services, and a small scholarship for single mothers returning to school. She didn't want a statue. She didn't want her name engraved in gold. She just wanted to plant seeds she might never see grow. Months passed. Autumn turned the trees in Beacon Hill into bursts of amber and fire. The smell of cinnamon and roasted chestnuts drifted through the cobblestone streets. Grace's garden bloomed with chrysanthemums. She spent her days painting, writing in journals, reading under a blanket by the fire. No one knocked on her door demanding money. No one called her selfish for resting. One quiet Sunday, while sketching the skyline from her balcony, Avery stopped by with a small envelope. "It was dropped off this morning," she said, setting it gently on the table. It was a letter from Ethan. The handwriting was shaky, almost unfamiliar. Inside was a single page. No apologies, no excuses, just a few short lines. "I know you probably won't read this. I wouldn't blame you if you didn't. I just wanted you to know I finally understand what you gave me. I hope one day you find peace. Maybe you already have. I wish I'd been better. Love, Ethan." She folded the letter, placed it in a wooden box, and stored it in the attic. Not out of bitterness, but because the past belonged where it was, behind her. Grace didn't need vengeance. She didn't need closure in the traditional sense. What she had, at long last, was something better. Peace. She had been a mother, a protector, a provider. And now, finally, she was something she'd never dared to be. Her own person. No longer someone's sacrifice. No longer someone's shadow. Just Grace. And that, she realized, was enough. For decades, Grace believed love meant giving without limits, offering her time, her energy, even her dreams in the name of motherhood. But sometimes, love taken for granted becomes invisible. What Grace's journey teaches us is something many older adults struggle to accept. Setting boundaries isn't a betrayal, it's survival. There comes a time in life when selflessness must give way to self-respect. When your body is tired, when your heart has been broken too many times, and when the people you love stop seeing you as a person and only as a provider, you're allowed to walk away. Grace didn't stop being a mother. She simply stopped being a martyr. And in doing so, she discovered peace, dignity, and the quiet power of choosing herself. To every older viewer who has ever given too much and received too little, let this story be your reminder. You are not selfish for protecting your heart. You've earned the right to live gently, breathe deeply, and be loved not for what you give, but for who you are.